Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Come to order, please. Thank you, Pamela. So every week I ask, and every week someone forgets, but here we go again. Please turn off your cell phones or silence them at this time. Take this opportunity. Yes, appreciate it. If you're a fan of the Upper Ohio Valley Historical Review, we have republished a limited edition of our most popular issue, which is the one about wheeling in 50 objects. We have them for $10 because they're full color printing, if you're interested in that. And this gentleman, Ryan Dacca, will be here on June 18th to talk about the greatest movie ever made, Jaws. But actually, it's a prequel about Quint, the fisherman, and how he got to be at Amity. So those are $19. Next week, Source of Resilience. Olya Panovic will be here to talk about her family. They are refugees from Ukraine. She will tell you about their journey and how they got here to Wheeling and what they left behind. And then in 2 weeks, our friend Manami Kawazoe returns from the West Liberty Outreach Initiative, Japanese outreach, to tell us about Japanese food, in particular, a dessert cake, rice cake that we'll be making here in the room. So that'll be on the 28th of May. Our guest today is Marc Harshman. Besides being a poet, he's the author of 14 nationally acclaimed children's books, including Fallingwater, the building of Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece, co-authored with Egan Smucker. His collections of poetry include Woman in Red Anorak, winner of the Blue Lynx Prize, Believe What You Can, winner of the Weatherford Award from the Appalachian Studies Association, WVU Press, and also named the Appalachian Book of the Year by the Mountain Heritage Literary Festival in Tennessee. Dark Hills of Home, published by Monongahela Books in 2002, celebrated his 10th anniversary as West Virginia Poet Laureate, and his newest volume released this past December is Following the Silence, Press 53, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, from which he will be reading today. He has also just been named the Appalachian Heritage Writer for 2024 by Shepherd University's Appalachian Studies program. Marc holds degrees from Bethany College, Yale University Divinity School, and University of Pittsburgh. He is also the curator of the Wheeling Poetry Series here at OCPL, now in its 9th season, having featured nearly 40 highly regarded poets from across the country. And he is, as I mentioned, appointed in 2012 by Governor Earl Ray Tomblin, the 7th Poet Laureate of West Virginia. Here is Marc Harshman.
Thank you, Sean. I can't thank you enough. What Sean does here at the Ohio County Public Library is just such a gift to the entire community. He's been giving this gift for so long now, and I don't think any of us can thank he and this library enough. In my estimation, it's easily the finest library in the state of West Virginia. So there. And thank you all for coming. So yes, it's wherever 2 or 3 are gathered is called a good poetry reading. So you've done a great thing in being here today. Let me just make 2 quick announcements. Upcoming in the Wheeling Poetry Series on August 13th, I'm extremely happy to welcome my dear and old friend, Dr. Bonnie Thurston, who will be reading from her book, her books of poetry, along with another old friend, Cheryl Denise, from Philippi, West Virginia. The two of them will be holding down the fort for the Wheeling Poetry Series, August 13th. And then onto your calendar, put August 22nd, the next edition of the Wheeling Poetry Series after that, which will feature Sarah Henning and Rachel Peckham. Two other women I'm happy to call friends. They're both great mid-career poets, both teaching at Marshall University. I try to always make sure that I humble myself appropriately by reading from a truly great writer before I read a few of my own poems. And I thought today I would start with Jane Ann Phillips, who some of you may know has just won the Pulitzer Prize in fiction for her novel about the Weston Insane Asylum. And Jane is an amazing writer, but her very first books were poetry. And I didn't know Jane Ann at all then. I hardly knew West Virginia. And I see that it was, the edition I have was printed in an edition of 400 copies. So I'd better hang on to this volume of prose poems called Sweethearts. And here's the last poem of Jane Ann's in that volume. Strangers in the Night. Like everyone else, she thought a lot about eating and sleeping. When she was sleeping, she felt like death, floating free, a white seed over the water. Eating, she thought about sex and chewed pears as though they were conscious. When she was making love, she felt she was dancing in a churning water, floating, but attached to something else. Once, she almost died and went so far she saw how free the planet floated, how it is only a shadow, and was frightened back to herself. Later, when she explained this to him, he put his arms around her. She thought she had come home, and they were in a shadow, dancing. Jane Ann Phillips. By the way, her new novel got a terrible review. I can't remember now from where. I think it was the New York Times, and I don't know for sure, but I can imagine she was pretty bummed out about that. But a Pulitzer Prize, I think, is more than adequate revenge. So hats off to our own West Virginia novelist, Jane Ann Phillips. Yeah. Great. Oh, this is so hard to ever know where to start. But I'm going to start this way with one older poem, not from the new book, and then we'll go on. I got to help crown the youth laureate for the state of West Virginia just last weekend, and I used this little quotation from C.S. Lewis, who has written, "A pleasure is full grown only when it is remembered." And that leads me to this poem that I often like to read about remembrance. In this case, it's the remembrance of the Second World War, and it's placed in Ohio. And as you know, the Bible, if used for nothing else, was often the place where one kept track of who had died, who had been born, when, where, what marriages, etc. That's here. And the island Peleliu, which few people remember today, but probably more blood was shed on this little island in the Pacific Theater than anywhere else during the Second World War, Peleliu. It has an epigraph by the American poet May Sarton. This is what poetry can do, to make the unbearable bearable and to release grief. Restless. In spectacular sunlight, the old woman's fingers never stop. Knit and purl, knit and purl. They work an invisible and resilient yarn. I wonder what she is making, or rather when it was and where. Perhaps it was that elm-shaded porch in Apple Valley during the war, where letters were read and hours spent matching headlines, foreign names to the atlas next to the Bible in which already 2 new death dates were recorded that year. Brother Oliver, 36, son Richard, 19. Oliver in the North Atlantic, Richard on an island in the Pacific. Peleliu, less than a fraction the size of her small county in rural Ohio. Such size puzzled her, seemed unfair, unseemly. Maybe that's why She was so good with her hands, rarely dropping a stitch, producing perfect sweaters and scarves and afghans. But I think now it's nothing so elaborate as a sweater. Only a pair of socks, practical, simple, what the boys needed. And maybe her hands are simply searching another pattern, that one we all reach for, wishing to bring the dead back from dying, to bring them back who've gone away from us, away from the touch of hands that once could mend anything if there was enough yarn, enough light, enough time. No, that's very this is from the new book, Following the Silence. It's a poem called How the Ending, and it has an epigraph by the late, great American poet Jack Gilbert, who spent many, many years in Pittsburgh. He has an epigraph I couldn't resist. I don't think it's where the poem began, but I couldn't resist using it someday. And the epigraph was simply, quote, "I am unexpectedly alone in West Virginia." You see, I couldn't help. How the ending begins. How the ending begins. The hay barn above the river slowly settles among berry brambles and multiflora rose. Merle said it's a quiet death. Most ensures a secure, untroubled rest. Immaculate clouds are building storms in the west, even as the single hawk continues its canvas of prey. The squirrel reconsiders his mad dance, the erratic map of his autumn planting of walnuts. The forest steadily devours the outer fields, while what remains of the fence rusts and sags. The boundaries remain locked within the courthouse, and those with a memory of the reasons why joined the liar's bench of angels long ago. The farmhouse itself has been leveled. The riot of ragweed and dock, where once the kitchen garden thrived, these determined weeds telling their own story of what's to come. Hard to imagine the extravagance of order when the simplicity of ruin is everywhere evident. Easy to imagine how lonely the landscape becomes when even the dead have lost their voice. This next poem, which is the first poem in the volume, I'm dealing with ghosts and death, but in a, I wouldn't want to say funny way, but there's a certain kind of humor here. I use palimpsest. Remember, that's the word that means, if you pressed hard on a sheet of paper, you might be able to read what was underneath by that force. Seems like there was something else I wanted to tell you, but of course I can't find it. We'll just take our chances. How's that? Okay. There's false teeth. I find all these weird words coming to me as I get older. I do not have false teeth, and God bless you if you do. But it's funny what shows up with age and time. Oh, there is Dickens here. You may not know it, but I have the dead at one point where I say, if not chains and moans. And of course, I am seeing the Muppet Christmas Carol at that point. So you didn't think you'd laugh today. August ghosts. August ghosts. And so perhaps they do stand just there, lost in the bright and shadow of goldenrod and grapevine. They, the dead, whom we know would return if only we quit trying so hard. We had wished truth, a crisp palimpsest on the mirror above grandmother's bureau, where lavender lingers, where the stain persisted of the water glass in which granddad's teeth rested at night. We had expected, if not chains and moans, at least a few footfalls in the attic, or the slam of a door like the one just now when the wind swept it from your hands and the dog escaped. Or perhaps simply that shimmering sheet of light loosed unnaturally from the shadow behind the curtains. Was it that was them? But we expect too little when we look for such audible photographic certainty. Even if ears could tongue the other world's glossolalia, they would not speak. Even if eyes could review every picture ever snapped, these trillions of snapshots, those trillions of snapshots, we could not find them. But here, with afternoon advancing, a very real grouse busily feeding its young on the lawn stretching in the heat luxuriously towards the tree line. Here, where the wind's susurrus lifts our eyes into an anarchy of sunshine from the dark entanglement of weed and brush, here we might. Here we lift our eyes as if all we had to do was follow the flickering of roof, ready for a new destination, just as I am, just as I am. Um, I am, despite long years in West Virginia, and I am, despite being West Virginia's poet laureate, a native-born Hoosier. And it shows up on occasion, especially around the theme of basketball or tornadoes. By the way, I was the basketball coach for the 5th and 6th grade team in Macmillan, West Virginia. My only qualification, and I want to emphasize this, my only qualification being, I think, is that they heard I was a Hoosier, about which they presumed way too much. They do not know that on the freshman team, the last varsity team I played for, I was the only member of the team to go that entire year scoreless. Scoreless. But as I am with chess, I was a great defensive player. Tornadoes, it's a funny thing. I swear, not just the Weather Channel, but I think news feeds on fear these days in a way that I find almost dumbfounding. My grandfather, my father, and myself, I mean, we were all raised in Tornado Alley. Xenia, if you remember that great tornado, was just down the road. Recently, the tornadoes that were on the U.S. headlines were less than 10 miles from my home. But none of them, granddad, dad, myself, we never saw a funnel cloud in our life. They're not They're not as common as the TV news would have you believe. The closest I ever got to a tornado was on Sally's Backbone here in West Virginia, when after the great storm went through, Cheryl and I went outside and we saw fence posts that had been twisted off. So we figured that was a cyclonic wind. I'm not reading my poem, am I? I use the word Oz here. I use the word Oz, and that's enough. A red hen and a small woman. A red hen goes scratching inside its small house while hail gravels the roof, and I watch a bent woman walk resolutely on into the racing fog and wonder where she's going. Cows moan, horses nicker, the rooster crows once as if its neck's broken. The famous quiet before descends, approaches complete stillness except for the slender trill of the random breeze. Then the Oz scenes. The tin roof on the corn crib flaps and screams. Dust wraiths flute into the black afternoon. Storm rolls up its coven of loud children into its gray rug and goes off home. Mother yells for us to come out of the storm cellar. Now the morbid fear of tornadoes gone. Grandfather smiles. Myself, though, fixed at the window, hidden, am following that woman as she goes further on into something I think is longer and deeper and wider and more dreadful and wondrous than any of my mother's fearsome storms. I crawl into grandfather's lap. When I begin telling him what I saw and what I think about who that small woman is and where she's gone and what might become of us all, he keeps smiling. The sun shone, the crops showed solidarity and rose up. Drought stayed away, as did locusts and frogs and other wild misfortunes. The fog will come again. The storm will rain with ice. The chicken will scratch for kings and queens. Then the small woman will come, doggedly walking, and grandfather go on smiling, holding still, as will we all when the weather decides it's had enough and we grow patient at last, waiting and listening hard to the thin sound of that hen scratching for something a boy might plant that takes him to the stars. Yeah, I had lots of imagination. Curse or not, you can decide. As you know, we had a wonderful celebration here in January, a celebration of the great American poet, product of this Ohio Valley, Timothy Russell. Again, hats off to the library here for hosting that event in which we celebrated his posthumous full-length collection in Plano Vita, The Full Life, the collected poems of Timothy Russell. And here's a poem that I wrote in memoriam for Tim. I also never read, this is the danger about reading from new work. I don't know if there's anything I need to let you in on, but I don't think so. It shows the imprint of my own personal reading, and I've been reading a lot of poetry and translation for the last 10, 15 years or more. Tomas Tranströmer, the Swedish Nobel poet, comes to mind. Wisław Szymborska, Adam Zagajewski, Polish and Polish/Ukrainian poets are all part of that. And Jean Follain, the French poet. Wild Rose, in memoriam, Timothy Russell. The barges drift through the river's shadows, untouched by the weight of the stars. There are as well these amber ingots slowly molding themselves out of a different fire into the law we swear will hold. Inside the mill, tiny men work their brooms, clearing away tears from the continued manufacture of obsolescent dreams. The man of sorrows looms over them from the altar. The priest, with his back turned, is collecting his own share of the silence. Before the villages spilled out from Pittsburgh, There were still those who remembered the Mingo's lament, but now there's not one left to mourn the extinction of beast, forest, people. Without science, but with smoke and imagination, there once stood a transparent wisdom under that elm at the edge of the clear cut. A mind could call down the stars and map any landscape with militant accuracy. A map could show the many houses of gods more familiar and powerful than the underfed skeletons of their replacements who have only words to move them from one flimsy pew to the next. And no idea how time past becomes this beautiful wild rose rooted in what has always been headed our way. Hats off, dear Tim. We're sorry you're gone. All right. Funny poem. Yeah, that's dangerous for me. By the way, yeah. This is for two old friends from graduate school at this, give or take, the same time as Tim. There's an Italian dessert. Is that correct? Panna cotta. Do I have this right? Somebody nod their heads and say yes. Good, good, good. I was doing a reading with these good folks in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is ironic because I just read there again just a couple weeks ago. Panna cotta is something we picked up. By the way, I do not want to glorify alcohol. It's been a curse in my own personal family, but I think there's room for humor. Traffic stop with DUI. I think that they're mostly blue sirens these days. We were laughing so hard, of course, it didn't register until we'd gone blocks beyond your errant driving. We rehearsed a foolproof script for another few blocks. Then, with appropriate innocence, demure demeanor, you'd stopped and let down your window. Did the policeman get to say anything? I'm not sure, but do know you did get said what needed to be said. Officer, it was the panna cotta. Yes, that, and no other. It was tipping over, and I'm sure you understand we couldn't allow that. No, sir, not ever. And yes, then I did swerve to right the said Italian confectionery, swerved right and left multiple times. Yes, that would be right. You folks haven't been drinking by any chance, have you? No, sir, absolutely not. Sir, only panna cottaing it, sir. Which I thought sounded extremely funny, and which must have been because we did laugh as if it had truly been extremely, absolutely, and gut-wrenchingly funny. I think now, though, that perhaps we overplayed our hand at that juncture. For it was then he asked us all to please step out of your car. And we did, pleasantly, laughing, and trying to assume Hollywood compliance by lifting arms high, which I don't think he actually asked us to do, but which must have been impressive to see. Our arms raised straight up to morning and still laughing. Curiously, though, none of us could walk the proverbial straight line. But we were laughing so hard, how could we? I'm sure alcohol had nothing to do with it. Still, after we paid our fine and someone's uncle's brother bailed us out in the wee hours and we got back to your house, I did see the 2 empty fifths of Jim Beam on the table beside all the sympathy cards. And remembered that your mother's bed was to be forever and ever eternally empty now, and wondered then how it was no one had thought to say why it was we were drunk, half crazy with grief, and that the panna cotta was your mother's favorite. And truly, we did somehow want to make it right, knowing somehow we never could. Well, that was kind of fun. Oh, well, we're at that part of the reading where I just want to read them all. And of course, that would lower my stance in your estimation dramatically. Let me read like I say, things to do with age and old come more and more often. This one's about two old men. It's called Mariners, sailors, etc. Veracity is truth. I don't need to tell you. Mariners. This is a little image poem. Two men sit talking, one voice with a whistle, the other a cough that marks their progress through the old stories. Their shadows pool on the weed-clutched sidewalk below a paint-blistered bench. Their necks are tilted as if the weight of memory unbalanced their skulls, and perhaps does, more depth than lives, with only these stories to raise those long gone above the shifting horizon. And when their eyes meet to confirm the veracity in these ongoing resurrections, the tales they tell keep them afloat in that rearing ocean on this, their voyage out. Comes to us all, doesn't it? Oh, a dozen lines in memory, Emily Carr, the great Canadian painter that I loosely associate with my favorite group of painters, the group of seven, the post-impressionist painters of Canada. A dozen for Emily. Finally, the wild trees dance and the divine chaos returns, our only partner. Elmer. My dad was farmed out to a kind of aunt and uncle when he was in high school because his baby sister had come along and Grandma and Grandpa didn't have any money. And besides Hetty and Elmer, the aunt and uncle loved my dad, and was already doing farm work for them. So this is about Elmer, who would come to visit me when I was sick. He was a sweet, sweet man. I think that's it. Elmer. I could see the bent man bend, climb down out of his mud-washed Chevy pickup and limp towards the porch. After 80 hard years on the farm, he still kept pace with kindness. He seemed to appear from behind the sofa where I lay breathless and quiet, waiting on my fever to crumble and reassemble as buttered toast with blackberry jam and tea, I could hope. It happened that way on good days when I wasn't dying, though I expected to, any day in those scarlet-fevered, month-long days. He'd brought me a toy trumpet and a corny joke about a smart-alecky mule, as well as a comic book, The Green Lantern, and a piece of cake from Aunt Hetty. Later, that cold spring, he lifted me onto his lap behind the huge wheel of the Farmall tractor, and we lumbered across the ink-black soil destined to become tobacco, corn, and hay. The wind was fresh, and my lungs filled with simple and miraculous air. And I shivered now, without fever, and believed the field would soon be dotted green with crops and hope. I believed then, too, that I would live to tell a story, almost like this one. All right. Another one from Randolph County, Indiana. It's this. I have a thing for cemeteries. I hope it's not morbid. Some of you know it's every evening I walk the Green Lawn Cemetery here in Wheeling, and this is the cemetery outside Union City, Indiana, where my mother's people are buried. The Others. It's a little prose poem, which I don't have so many of in this volume. The Others. To the south, where the Pennsylvania Railroad crosses the creek over a simple stone arch, I see the smallest flicker of movement, a slender blue filament of color, vertical, unnatural, quivering. But as its long neck turns to me and then subtly away, I've seen that I'm seen. A great heron still in the still shadows of the still stream, seeing and waiting. Winter is well established. It's late December in the far south, far away. There is a story, but it isn't mine. Nor is it finished yet. Were I closer to the earth, native to it, I'd guess there's a sacrifice in progress. And with it, something will take a greater hold on life. Someone's mouth full of blood and feathers will carry one thread. Perhaps a crow or turkey buzzard, and if the latter, will be flossing its horny beak afterwards. And as the sun, the wind, the frost, and the slow absorptive veins of the soil advance and add their warp and woof, they begin not to finish, but complete. And me, I'll hold up this thread, once light, now words, perhaps still a quiver, and, if lucky, transparent with the ways of the nameless gods who've not yet left us here, alone in this lonely land. All right. Okay, let's try to head towards the end. This is the oldest poem in the volume. I can't remember if it was collected once before or not. It's called Crayons. It must have been written after Sarah's birth, so it's not quite as old as I think. It's Sarah Jane playing with Sarah Beth. Sarah Beth Yoder. Crayons. Amid the litter of greens and blues, oranges and yellows, two girls point and yell, demonstrating with voices and bodies the purposes of pigment, paper, breath, and their breath let loose, their words outflung, creating a speech pulled from little lungs and brains brimful with news. Their mouths stretch, and with their eyes they illumine this rebirth of language, shaping it for you to speak as well inside this endless room in which they've conquered time. There's nothing like watching little children play. That only one child, and the you here is me, that only one child is yours, no matter. The other runs too, as lovingly, arms open, a kiss, believing in your goodness by the other's example. An example telling you the responsibility is never simple to live for another day when such innocence might come to you, to sit with you, to speak to you, that language of theirs before ours, lost now to paradise. Some will tell you to enter their embrace and discover what living can hold. Enough, this feeling here that love had before it was reduced by repetition and sex. Some will tell you it's unlucky to remember anything beyond these moments. And then moments go missing somewhere beyond you. Some will tell you to follow love into the nursery and break all the clocks there and return, renaming the world with words so inflamed with prurient goodness, they sear a delicate maze where meaning navigates its way within the skull. So many good intentions, so little to do about them. You will see their ceaseless creating, their chattering mouths, their somersaulting intelligence, their tongues and lips join to whistle, to sing their hand-clapping dances. You will see all this, these little creatures, displacing nothing with such infinitude that you'll feel something slow within yourself, memory sluggish from its daily dredging of words, slowing until finally you arrive here beside me, dumb, listening to these children tell the wonders which have carried their lives toward a place we have called the future. They call it home. We lost John Prine at the beginning of the pandemic. Frank, you remember him coming to Bethany. He was surely one of the two or three finest writers of I don't want to call it popular, but great lyricists of the same rank as Bob Dylan or Joni Mitchell, let's say. I referred to a couple of his songs at the end of this poem. And I think I've renamed my old dog, Max here. The winter box. Somewhere beyond the edge of the planet, the sun crawled away, and the motionless cold built its winter box around me. Still, over that southern hill, a thin brush of cloud scrapes away enough gray to leave a blush of peach. Earlier, I followed a dog named Max on a circuitous trail of his own choosing. I had many questions for him, but he was impatient and had little time for me, his black eyes inscrutable. I'd thrown tea leaves from breakfast onto a snowbank. Could I have read them? Intuited ideograms from the divine? It was Christmas time, but I'd found no angels except the sad one above me, teetering lopsided from the crown of the tree, a tree headed to the landfill day after tomorrow, and after that, a new year. I'll sing the saddest songs I can find, Christmas in prison, hello in there, and do as I always do, throw words ahead of me and follow, hoping against hope, as my father liked to say, which now I hear sounds pretty hopeless. Okay, 3 poems and I'll let you loose. Okay, so I use the word bracken here, a term I think we're not. It's this is set in the Black Mountains of Wales, and on top of those mountains are just great commons that seem to stretch forever. And occasionally, if you're lucky, you'll come across small groups of wild ponies and wild horses. Very, very beautiful part of the world, and they're very high. I also have a slight allusion to Robert Frost's famous poem, Mending Wall here. And the poem begins with an epigraph from the great American writer, poet, Trappist monk, Thomas Merton. And the epigraph is, "There is nothing left for me but to live fully and completely in the present. Just here were these horses." Oh, topiary, that's when you cut shrubs into shapes, like the English especially like to do. Just here were these horses, not in a car, but on foot, through the knee-high field of bracken, these giant fields of ferns. Did I get that said? Maybe I didn't. They're ferns, bracken. Not in a car, but on foot, through the knee-high field of bracken, upward, toward the cloud-torn rocks, the larks and sheep blending their music. Not at a desk, but in a chair below the patchwork shadows of the old ash anchoring the summer yard, where a breeze arrives in time, miraculously. Not in a chair, but on your back, on a blanket on the ground, your hands behind your head, your face uplifted towards the topiary clouds, where again you might roam the corridors of childhood. Not in bed, but up early before the sun, with a certain serenity to greet you, and you passing it along to partner, sweetheart, child, and taking them fishing or walking, swimming or dancing, as if your life depended upon it. Not on the phone, but with pen and paper, key strike and screen, patiently rediscovering yourself and dressing your affections with the respect that comes word by word, one after the other, patiently and intensely, like frost mending a wall. Not at the queue in the bank, but in the forest. Look for a currency to redeem beyond tomorrow. Look for a quiet to heal the times you forgot to say thanks. For the small change whose smile transforms the day outwards. Not in school, not at work, not following orders, not clicking the mouse and chasing after, not fueling the economy, not in fear, not in charge, not ever groveling, not in a box, not in a binary system, but here where these horses are, just here, an open August field, unadorned and empty, save for them, the air raw and alive, their bushy tails of straw, their thick necks, their muscular cords of sinew, the liquid pools of their dignified eyes. With them, to be in their company, a step can be taken, a breath drunk that might be the saving of your life, and if begun in time, the saving of the world as well might begin just so, just here, just now. Well, I've been so good at finding all my poems today. No, that's why. This is a poem for my friend and colleague in the poetry business, Doug Van Gundy. Some of you have seen here before. I love the old fiddle tune, "You Piney Mountain," and learned from Doug that the yew pine is actually the red spruce, which grows in the really high mountains east of here and south. And I got to go with Doug hiking through the yew piney mountains. And it's just a wild place. Not all that much. It wasn't all that much, you might say. Nothing to write home about, just a heavy green floor of ground cedar and springy peat, littered with reindeer moss and lichened stones. Here and there, evidence of flying squirrels, muddy punctures in the cloth of the moss, and coyotes, their ropey black scat, and overhead a canopy of birch, beech, and red spruce, the latter the locals' yew pine, whose pointed black lances bristle along the ridgeline. Not that much, perhaps, and our only companion, a still and remembered peculiar silence, a silence with weight and the kind of karma you can't get from books or gurus or poets. I lean against the gray birch or sit on the white sandstone or kneel in the faded leaf litter and pray without thinking God or prayer. Pray by simply staying put, letting time fall away from me, letting thought fall away from me until it's just me and these things that don't seem all that much, but are. I taught, as I said before, in Senator McMechen School and other schools, including Sand Hill, the last three-room school, I believe, in this part of the state. It was a treat to teach there. At Senator McMechen, we had a large population in those years of kids who were troubled, shall we say. I don't know the words any longer. I can't keep up, but some were in wheelchairs, some were on the spectrum. I know that phrase. And this is the poem that won the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award, which I find very ironic because I was in love with Ginsberg as a very young man, and he had just about ruined me as a poet. And not that I don't admire him, but anyway, it's not a very Ginsbergian poem, but I'm happy to have won the award. I also refer here to Little Orphan and Goblins, and that's my Hoosier self speaking again. James Whitcomb Riley, who wrote in dialect and has these terrible, terrible, corny poems, but he also was the man who wrote Little Orphan Annie and When the Frost is on the Pumpkin. And I remember my father reciting those poems to me, and that's why I'm standing here today, by the way. And I also use the word Cregan. Cregan refers to an Irish folk tale featuring an elusive hare, which was later made into a beautiful song. Poet in the Schools. I once read this poem, realized I was missing one of the stanzas. So try not to do that today. Poet in the Schools. A morning with cold in its teeth, wind turning the children in circles as they waddle from bus to door. Amid the clamorous echoing of bells and lockers and the shrill bleat of the intercom secretary reciting schedules, scores, bland menus of pizza burgers, chicken fingers, and meatloaf, these children survive. In this brick box of a school, I read them poems about Santa Claus and ice cream, the Craig and white hair, and all the ones with silly rhymes. They squirm and fidget, bums flat on the hardwood, and smile, braces gleaming. Some of them smell, others tell without a word about their home lives. His grunge t-shirt, her thin, stained skirt, another's nervous lick eczema. I mourn for them. In the back, the troubled ones sit in wheelchairs with their lolling heads, rocking, frozen, or immaculate, each wearing their differences differently, spectrum analyzed, tongues restless, eyes fixed and deep as any far universe, with moans from little nightmares the rest of us only glimpse across a chasm of luck and privilege. And after silently cursing a small prayer against genetics and certain of the happier gods, I breathe, go on, surrender to what poetry is capable of. Let the shrieking wail of goblins enter this cold gym. Thrill them with the little orphan. Let Seuss rhyme laughter with my banter. Entice them and swear to let nothing deny their deliverance from pablum into art, however defined. Paper mache, songs, tales, poems, dance, drums. I must not fail them. No amount of belching, farting, and whispering, no joker sailing a wad of paper or meddling teacher overreacting, no rumbling furnaces or groaning refrigerators will stop these angelic words. Nothing is to deflect them. So I tell the one about the family who lived on a mountain so high they had to keep rocks in their pockets to keep from being blown away. And then the one about how the songs we sing will one day save us. I tell them about heroes diving for the drowned, rescuing us with stories. And now the room has grown silent, and I'm pleased, sure enough, and grateful. But then there's this smack, and a different silence, an embarrassed one, and another smack, and then a kind of out of sync, awkward slip slap. And I see embarrassment coming over the faces nearest, and the slapping becomes louder, approaching assuredly some rhythm. It's the boy in the wheelchair, cream turtleneck with a necklace of paper pumpkins, and he's straightforward, head up, his eyes finding mine, and I return the gaze. Maybe we all do, and into his deep universe fall, transformed, and his rhythm solidifies into what we all recognize now. He is simply clapping. And now we are all clapping together, all of us together as we should be. And I join this extemporaneous applause, knowing it's not for me at all, but for what he's found for every single one of us who's ever not been called on, whose spell hung out to dry, been picked last, been poked, tripped, and toppled, lost, strung out, yearning, abused, dying, somewhere out of sight in our private universes. And he has opened the rooms of paradise for us to see how simply easy it is to smile as he is smiling, to smile and smile and smile. Thank you all very much. Thanks. I went on a little long. Sorry about that. It's hard. And I host a lot of readings. I'm about ready to kill a poet that goes over time. So, but I am happy to, if anybody has any questions, I promised to let you go. Anything they want to ask? Yes. From Yale Divinity to West Virginia, because I started at Bethany College. And at that time, as there are several Bethanians here of my generation can tell you, it was an amazing school. at one point, at least in what I was studying, all of my teachers were from Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Oxford. It was a very impressive place to be. And it's thanks to my professors. I mean, I did not have sterling grades. They were decent by the time I graduated, but they wrote my ticket to Yale. Probably the more interesting comment to make about Yale is not perhaps what you would think. Although I was in divinity school, I was there not to ever become a priest or preacher. That is not in my genes. But I had fallen in love with Joseph Campbell, who some of you may remember was the person who helped us rediscover what mythology was all about. And divinity school was an umbrella under which I could study things like ancient stories at the same time that my colleagues were studying the Bible and how to preach. Curiously, though, the one professor I really wanted to study with, within a year, he's left Yale and gone to Emory. And so I love telling this, I took 2 semesters, not one, I took 2 semesters in the study of the book of Deuteronomy. I still don't know. I still don't understand that. Other than I do think it taught me to be a close reader, if you see what I mean. And that is not a bad skill for a poet. Now, while I was, there's a lot of other things going on, both in my personal life and elsewhere, but I was starting to write with a real passion. I would audit a course from Norman Holmes Pearson, who was the biographer of the great American poet H.D. And that was a course on the undergraduate campus, but it really changed me. And New Haven, as you may or not remember, is only an hour and a half train ride from the city. So every third weekend I was in New York going to jazz clubs or going to hear poetry, dragging Cheryl with me. And it was a wonderful time, a dark time. I struggled. There was a death in my family, blah, blah, blah. But Yale was important. It was also a cultural education. I didn't get that said. For this farm boy, and Bethany wasn't that much bigger than the farm in Indiana. Yale was a whole other story. It was a cultural education for which I'm grateful. Other questions? I love chatting. Yes. Oh, the kind of the whole beat era of writing, there was a huge emphasis placed upon a kind of stream of consciousness writing. And unless you're a real genius, you can only take that so far without becoming extremely boring and not producing great writing. I will never get over how Kerouac was able to write on the road, although I've now read that it wasn't quite as spontaneous as the myth, as the myths like to tell us that. And to their credit, Ginsberg and Kerouac and some of the others were very smart boys and had real talent. I'm afraid that they didn't always serve it very well by being so loose in their approach, my opinion. Oh, and it does remind me, there weren't many women in that group, and they were treated pretty terribly. But 2 women from that generation that I still admire, Diane de Prima and Denise Levertov. Anything else? No. More than past time. Thank you all so much. Oh, we do have books for sale, my children's books, as well as the new book, Following the Silence. So I'd be happy to personalize any of those volumes for you. Again, thank you so much. It's very kind of you to come. Oh, wait, one last question. Joseph Campbell, you can find in the library. He was a writer. No, he's a writer of books about mythology. Oh, no relation to Alexander Campbell. Yes, very good, very good. Thanks again, everybody.